Democratic Republican used to describe one political party. Founded by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, it was the formal name given to Anti-Federalists, those who were opposed to the Constitution, opposed to too strong a central government like the kind favored by George Washington. Washington warned, splitting into political parties, that's going to mean a return to monarchy, because rival factions always long for a king to embody the spirit of revenge. That George Washington's opposition party would split into a culture-warring duopoly, financed by big corporations, that would have been his worst nightmare. Because anti-corporate sentiment, that was a fundamental inspiration for the entire revolution. That tea that the Sons of Liberty threw into the Boston Harbor belonged to the British East India Company, the very first international corporation. The East India Company had its own armed forces, 70,000 troops. And that grew to nearly 300,000 troops in the 1800s. The company invaded India, seized land, resources, levied its own taxes. India was a global superpower producing over a third of the world's goods and services until the East India Company decimated their economy. And the company would trade in anything, including opium, illegally, which led to a war with China. But Britain considered them too big to fail. So they were nationalized, and the company's legacy is known today as the British Empire, which the former British colonies rebelled against, with the financial backing of France, Spain, and Denmark. Now, to pay them back, newly independent American businesses needed to thrive so they could be taxed under the new centralized powers provided by the US Constitution. And for businesses to thrive, they needed to be free from the economic tyrannies like those imposed by the East India Company. So for the longest time, to preserve a functioning democracy, most corporations were not allowed to operate outside their home state, and in some cases not even outside their home county. There were limits on company size, all kinds of restrictions on behavior and ownership, and that lasted all the way through until the Civil War when the railroads were consolidated. And that allowed them to grow so large that they took over related industries and formed trusts that controlled more and more of the entire economy. Now, throughout the 1900s, antitrust legislation was a foundational notion for free enterprise, a requirement for economic and political freedom. But large-scale propaganda efforts, financed by those trusts, convinced enough Americans the antitrust movement was just big government bureaucracy, and so the US government abandoned its enforcement. And now, of course, most of America's industries are dominated by a handful of trusts that can coordinate prices and production. They suppress innovation and competition. They have no accountability, and of course they can raise prices under the cover of inflation. Prior to the 1970s, there were no companies that had lobbyists. Now they spend billions on it. In George Washington's farewell address, he warned voters, don't let your attachments to state or region divide you and lose the independence and liberty your union provides. Well, perhaps there were some seeds of wisdom there.